In 2010, Call of Duty Black Ops sold 31 million copies, making it the best-selling game in the franchise at the time and one of the best-selling games of all time. This is widely regarded as Call of Duty's golden age, where every new installment of the franchise seemed to shatter records set just the year before. The game series was a staple of the early YouTube scene, and it launched the careers of some household names in the online gaming space that are still active today. Set during the Cold War, Black Ops was a sequel to 2008's World at War, and both of the games shared a similar dark, slightly creepy atmosphere. As an 11-year-old who got their first Xbox Live subscription in 2010, I was immediately drawn to Treyarch's series over Infinity Ward's more Michael Bay, action movie-esque Modern Warfare series. In particular, I was oddly infatuated with the world building that went into the Black Ops series. Beyond just the campaign, I was infatuated with how the multiplayer maps seemed to build on the lore and general vibes of the campaigns. If I wasn't playing zombies or in an Xbox party, I would often load into private matches and walk around the empty maps, listening to the ambience that the developers inserted to make these 6v6 3-lane maps feel bigger than they actually were. It isn't a hyperbole to say that my love for history, which persists to this day, is intrinsically tied to my experience with these games. In recent years, as these games and the people who enjoyed them as children have aged, it's become increasingly common to see YouTube videos and TikToks that engage with their now empty multiplayer modes with varying degrees of nostalgia and unease. There's a sense that these maps, which were designed to host hectic gunfights in various game modes, are actually somewhat creepy. To be sure, the atmospheres of World at War and Black Ops do a lot of the heavy lifting in this regard. Everything from the music to the background noises to the muted gray and brown color palettes is designed to provoke a sense of discomfort and grittiness. So when I imagined how I would go about engaging with this somewhat oversaturated topic, I wanted to look beyond discussions about liminality or lonely nostalgia. Yes, all of these maps share a commonality in that they are eerie in the absence of the players that they were designed for, and yet I actually think there's something deeper at play here. This strange feeling of melancholic reflection that permeates these maps is heightened in some more than others, and I think that's because some of these maps are attempting to recreate real spaces, real battles, and real trauma within the bounds of a 6v6 arcade shooters. More than just reflections of an increasingly hazy childhood, these maps have become artifacts in their own right. They preserve not only our memories of playing them, but a particular way of imagining and remembering history in the late 2000s. Like the battlefields they sought to recreate, they have outlived the people who once filled them with life. The first map I wanted to take a look at is Castle from World at War. Its assets are ripped straight from the campaign mission Breaking Point, which sees US Marines assault Shuri Castle during the broader Battle of Okinawa. Okinawa was a part of the American island hopping campaign that was employed against the Japanese during World War II, and the island itself was intended to be used as a launching point for an invasion of mainland Japan, which did not occur due to the Japanese surrender following the dropping of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From April 1st to June 22nd, 1945, American forces were met with some of the most intense fighting of any theater of the Second World War. Japanese forces dug extensive tunnel and cave systems throughout the island, and waged a brutal war of attrition with the aim of inflicting maximum casualties and wearing down the will of the Americans. The fighting was slow, muddy, and intense. Every inch gained by U.S. forces was contested, and increased desperation and shortages on the Japanese side saw the forced conscription of thousands of middle and high school-aged children. While the land battle slogged on, American and British ships supported the invasion from sea with constant artillery bombardments, and were the subject of various Japanese kamikaze attacks involving over 1,500 aircraft. This resulted in the sinking of dozens of Allied ships and the deaths of innumerable Japanese and Allied forces at sea. In the midst of the chaos, roughly 100,000 Japanese soldiers were killed, along with an additional 100,000 civilians throughout a mixture of forced conscription, battle-related deaths, and government-sanctioned suicide. 12,500 Americans were killed, along with 119 of their British allies. Shuri Castle, the setting depicted in World at War, served as the command center for Japanese forces during the months-long battle. The structure, which had existed since the 14th century, was the victim of heavy artillery bombardment from the Allies. This is reflected in Treyarch's representation of the map and the rubble and structural damage that the player can observe. Castle carries with it a sense of finality, as it sits not only at the end of the Battle of Okinawa itself, but at the end of the war. The battle was the last major Japanese resistance faced by American forces, and set up the inevitable end of the war for the Emperor. Nazi Germany would surrender in May while the battle was still ongoing, allowing Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union to set the stage for their August invasion of Japan. The steep cost of the campaign would invariably play a role in President Harry Truman's decision to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Just outside of the map, the player can observe the dense hills and forests that American forces would have had to fight through to reach Shuri Castle. Much like real life, walking through the map reveals an abandoned command post, giving the player a sense that something big was here not too long ago. It feels final precisely because it is final. The signs of a hasty Japanese retreat are littered all over the map, and the scars of the battle on the land are visible throughout. And yet the surrounding forest, much like a character itself, continues to audibly penetrate the atmosphere, long after the battle is ended. That sense of finality that sits just outside of Frame and Castle is the fixture of Downfall. This map takes place in Berlin as Soviet forces break into the city. Fighting takes place directly outside the Reichstag, Germany's parliament building, and among the rubble of the city, which had been hammered by joint American-British air raids for much of 1945, culminating in the Soviet invasion. From April 16th to May 2nd, 1945, Soviet forces fought in some of the most intense urban combat of the 20th and 21st centuries. By the time of the battle, the war was effectively over, with an Allied victory all but guaranteed. During the collapse of Berlin's defenses, Italy's Benito Mussolini was captured and killed by Italian partisans after attempting to flee, and American forces were steadily working through the Japanese defenses at Okinawa. Adolf Hitler, growing increasingly panicked and delusional, insisted that Berlin should be defended to the last man. The defenders were a patchwork mixture of Wehrmacht and SS units, local police, Hitler Youth aged 12 to 16, and Volkssturm militia, who were often old men and children. The German resistance totaled roughly 100,000, while the Soviet presence just outside the city amounted to roughly 1.5 million soldiers. From April 20th to the 25th, Soviet forces aggressively shelled the city. The commander of German resistance in Berlin described the artillery barrage as, quote, uninterrupted. That destruction, the direct result of weeks of Allied air raids and Soviet shelling, surrounds the player on Downfall. The sun is blocked out by black clouds of smoke, and the city just outside the map is a disaster of half-destroyed buildings and rubble. The Nazi flags that once would have flown all over Berlin, the seat of the regime's power, are tattered and burning. The intense block-by-block urban combat would result in the deaths of 81,000 Soviet soldiers, over 90,000 German defenders, and 125,000 German civilians. Less than a mile away from where Downfall is set, Adolf Hitler and his advisors took shelter in the Führer bunker. As the battle raged on, Hitler would commit suicide on April 30th, 1945. The city collapsed into total Soviet control on May 2nd, with the official surrender being ratified on May 8th. The Soviet occupation of the city throughout May 1945 would see widespread abuses against German civilians, mass homelessness and looting, and a frantic search for the bodies of dead Nazi officials. Downfall perfectly captures the immense destruction of World War II, finally brought home to Berlin. What had begun in Poland in 1939 and stretched as far as London ended with the complete dissolution of Germany as a state, with Soviet troops roaming the halls of power. Much like Castle, Downfall presents the end of the war from the Axis perspective. Both Japan and Germany had exported violence on a mass scale throughout Europe and Asia, and in both cases these maps represent the return of that violence to the doorsteps of their power. The streets of Berlin are silent. Wartime propaganda plays on distant radios, The battle is fought with no hope, as the blackened Berlin skyline is littered with bombed out buildings and plumes of smoke. There is no retreat, no final front, and that hopelessness is felt in every inch of the map. Jungle represents an interesting departure from the previous two maps. To be sure, Black Ops has maps that depict real places, such as Hanoi or Berlin Wall. That said, I wanted to evaluate Jungle precisely because I think it captures something about the Vietnam War that the other maps don't. The map doesn't serve as a recreation of a specific engagement in the war. Rather, it's a composite of various battles that place the player deep within a Vietnamese jungle. It carries with it a sense of foreboding and uncertainty, fixtures for American forces in Vietnam. Jungle holds elements of battles such as the 1965 Battle of Nha Trang, which was the first engagement between U.S. forces and the North Vietnamese. Like Nha Trang, Jungle emphasizes close quarters engagements around a makeshift American staging area. The technological advantages that gave the U.S. a leg up in the war, such as superior air power and artillery capabilities, were effectively neutralized at Nha Trang by NVA forces engaging Americans at extremely close distances. U.S. forces successfully defended two landing zones, X-Ray and Albany, forcing an NVA withdrawal. The battle lasted from November 14th to November 18th, 1965, resulting in the deaths of 234 American soldiers and over 1,000 North Vietnamese. While the result was a technical strategic victory for the U.S., it revealed certain realities about the Vietnam War that would dispel the belief in an immediate victory that was common in Washington, D.C. at the onset. The North Vietnamese learned how to mitigate American technological supremacy and how to use the land to their advantage. They also demonstrated a resolve that American leadership would have to grapple with as the war became less popular at home in the coming years. Jungle captures so many of the mainstays of our cultural memory of the Vietnam War. The makeshift American staging area, the burnt-out villages, and the all-consuming forest make for a claustrophobic experience that feels quintessentially Vietnam from the American perspective. It is the fear of every hut, the understanding that every dark corner represents a potential ambush, and the lack of any permanent American infrastructure that places the player squarely within a war that differed drastically from American experiences in Japan and Korea. The uncertainty, chaos, and anxiety that follow the player throughout the map mirror the real-world events it was inspired by. All of these maps attempted to recreate real-world settings, battles, and experiences. In the cases of Castle and Downfall, they captured the real-life battles of Okinawa and Berlin. In the case of Jungle, the map serves as a mosaic of American popular imagination regarding the country's experience in Vietnam. All three do a wonderful job of capturing the essence of the wars they take place in. And yet, I still believe there's another layer to their relevance that extends beyond their digital retelling of World War II in Vietnam. Released in 2008 and 2010, respectively, both World at War and Black Ops occupied a unique space in the relationship the American public had with these wars. In 2010, there were roughly 2.3 million World War II veterans still living in the United States. By 2026, that number had fallen to just over 30,000. Similarly, in 2010, there were 7.6 million living Vietnam-era veterans, compared to 4 million today. That number is projected to drop dramatically as the 2020s shift into the 2030s. These games were created at a point where the stories of these veterans were still in abundance, and media, from movies to TV to video games, was constantly being produced to present those stories. Today, as those primary sources become less accessible, what we are left with are the secondary sources that were recorded and reproduced, such as in World at War and in Black Ops. I would posit that there are multiple layers of mourning that one experiences when revisiting these maps nearly 2 decades out from their inception. It's not simply that these empty spaces that were once occupied by constant engagements and frantic voice chats are now empty, nor is it as simple as a reminiscence on the age category that once enjoyed these spaces now being in their mid to late 20s and 30s. Rather, there's a deep understanding that these locations that were digitally preserved in the late 2000s and early 2010s are now losing the tether that once connected them to the real world. We have witnessed in effect the transition of these spaces from living memory into a broader cultural memory. In that way, games like these tell us just as much about the world they were created in as they do about where our own lives were personally in 2008 or 2010. This is not a unique phenomenon to the 21st century. Video games are just a relatively new entry into the way that societies struggle with presenting history, especially history that can still be heard through the voices of those who experienced it. World War II and Vietnam media continue to be released in video games and movies and TV and books, but they increasingly rely on secondary sources for their portrayal of these moments in time. It is when we consider this reality that one can fully appreciate the unique space and time occupied by Black Ops and World at War. They were a transition point from lived experience to cultural memory, and that can be felt in the emptiness of their battlefields, which have long since gone silent. What was once a collective cultural experience now exists as archaeology itself, being elevated to the same status as the sources it once drew on to faithfully emulate. This is more than liminality for liminality's sake. It's an example of our culture attempting to define a moment in real time, and now it is history itself.